In today's session of Creator Therapy, I'm joined by Ali Luke, my friend and fellow blogger and writer. Ali's been writing and creating content for well over a decade. She's also a fantastic writing coach that I've learned a lot from over the years myself. Ali, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks so much, Ryan. It's great to be here.
This conversation's been a long time coming. We've been working together on and off for, gosh, what feels like maybe 6, 7 years? Does that sound
That
right?
sounds about right to me. Yeah, it's a good few.
You've been an incredible help for me. You've created some of my favorite content on my blog. You've helped me out with a lot of first drafts that have gone on to be some of my favorite pieces. So I wanted to thank you.
Oh, awesome. That's really great to hear. And your blog has been such a pleasure to write for as well.
I appreciate that. Well, we got some love we're sharing here. So I want to dig into kind of the nitty gritty stuff. So the topic that I wanted to explore with you on this episode was how to boost your confidence as a writer in the age of AI. And to set the stage for this, I know a lot of writers, bloggers, creators, people who identify as being a writer first. I know a lot of people that feel like their vocation, their creative expression, their job even is being diminished or taken away from, and in some situations eliminated with the advent of AI. How do you feel about this?
I can really see where people are coming from because I think it's a big change and change can be uncomfortable. Um, for me personally, I don't really see it that AI is diminishing the writer's role so much as adding an extra tool we can use. And it can really be kind of as much or as little a part of the process as writers want. I think for freelancers, and a lot of my work is freelance, it is a change because I've seen some of my own gigs kind of shift under AI. I think we'll probably see that sort of settle down a little bit, in the kind of months and years to come. I think some businesses have been very quick to sort of jump to AI for like mass producing content really fast. And I think Google's already kind of starting to clamp down a bit on content that's just really quickly churned out. But honestly, it would do the same if you were writing that content with human writers. It's looking at the quality. And I think AI tools have come on massively in the past couple of years, but there's still a long way to go before they can really approach what a human can do. And I'm not sure, to be honest, they'll ever fully get there. I don't think AI is going to completely replace human writers by any stretch of the imagination.
I think we're in this really interesting stage of development with these tools where it's shiny object syndrome, right? Like it's all brand new, it's super exciting. Everyone who's interested in this and finds that something about it's drawing them in, they're tempted to want to make it their everything. And so a big part of what I've been doing is educating too, is trying to explain to people like, hey, these tools are not a replacement for you. It's not a replacement for actually doing the real work of a writer, of a creator, and putting yourself into your creations. And I'm curious what your take is on this. I don't know about you, but for me, whenever I land on a post that's clearly AI written, I almost immediately bounce. Like it is a really big turnoff to feel that a piece of content is very clearly AI generated.
Yeah, definitely. And you can tell, can't you? I mean, the style that AI writes in, and however well you prompt it, it's always going to be a bit off compared to a human. I do think AI is fine for some sort of limited purposes. So, say I wanted instructions on how do I install a WordPress plugin, something really basic. And if those instructions were written by AI and the writing style's not particularly exciting, it's just kind of clear, it tells me what I need to know. I'd probably be okay with that. Like, I could live with that. But if it's anything sort of a bit more meaningful, or where there's a bit more room for kind of nuance or different takes on a subject, then I think you have to have a human in the mix. Otherwise the content's going to seem sort of very thin, very dry. There's no real personality to it. There's no depth quite often with AI. So, there's not necessarily any rigorous research behind it. And we all know that AI sometimes just kind of makes things up. So you definitely need that sort of human element for anything, I think, that's beyond just a really, really basic kind of very information only type piece of content.
You make a great point here. I do find that AI is super useful for me with the quick Q&A style stuff.
Hmm.
And even like if I'm writing a blog post that's really in depth, got a lot of sections to it, let's say, it can be great for generating those paragraphs, those sections that are a little bit more on the formulaic side or answers, commonly understood answers to questions that people ask. I do think those are great use cases. What are you seeing as some of your favorite use cases for AI right now?
So I think for me personally, I'm probably bringing it more into the process quite early on. So sometimes if I'm just really stuck, I might get AI to come up with a bunch of ideas. So I'll put in a keyword and I'll get a list of ideas from that. Or even like with some of the tools you have in Write Blogger, for instance, I can put in my blog URL and it's really impressive how it will give me ideas that are sort of tailored to the kind of things I write about and to some degree the style in which I write, which is fantastic. But I don't tend to just use those ideas kind of straight off. Like they might spur another idea for me. So they spark my brainstorming. They don't sort of replace me. Sometimes it's an idea I might not have considered. Sometimes it's an idea that I know isn't quite right for my audience. But just kind of, if I'm just, when you have times when you're just creatively, you haven't got much to give, it can just kind of get me over that hump. So for me, that's one really good point to just bring in AI. And then another time I like to use it is with outlining. So I've tried using AI to come up with a whole outline, and to completely honest, it feels like some of me has been lost there. It's the outlines aren't bad, like they're competent, but it's not maybe quite the direction I would take with a post, especially on my own blog where I do want to put a lot of my voice and personality into it. So what I tend to do is write the outline myself as I normally would. I maybe spend 20 minutes on it. Then I go to AI, get AI to write an outline for the same blog post title, and I just check, okay, did the AI come up with a point that maybe I missed? Is there a different angle I want to incorporate in my post? There might not be. I might decide that actually I'm really happy with what I've got. But quite often it gives me something where I think, oh yeah, I do want to address that, or I want to kind of bring that in some way. So it's just like, it kind of like having a second person just to review my outline and just spot anything I might have missed out.
Yeah, so we're kind of orbiting around this idea of an assistant, right?
Mm-hmm.
AI is an assistant that you can bolt onto your creative process and fill in some gaps. And what you just explained there is something that I also do. So I think AI is usually pretty great at doing a quick scan and developing an understanding of what's important, let's say from an SEO standpoint or from a topical standpoint to cover in a post on any particular subject matter that you're wanting to create an article around. So sending AI out with that task of like create an outline based on what you see in top ranking content in Google for this keyword phrase. That could be a really interesting like way to prompt AI into filling some of those gaps that even if you take that first pass on creating an outline from within, you might fill some gaps afterwards. I love that. What do you have to
Absolutely,
say
yeah.
about writing complete articles with AI? Is it for you or no?
And I think that's the one where some bloggers do get quite into that, and I do think this can be that sort of confidence issue that we were kind of getting at, that obviously if you're feeling a bit anxious about writing a whole piece, if you're not sure where to begin, or if you're maybe just not confident in your writing itself, so you think, yeah, am I going to phrase this well, is my grammar correct, then it is quite tempting to turn to AI and just say, okay, write me a blog post. And and AI can. In Write Blogger, you've got tools that can do that. Even ChatGPT, if you prompt it, can write you something that at least looks like a blog post. It's not always quite what I would have in mind, but I do think it's a bit of a mistake, in all honesty, to just turn straight to AI for a whole blog post draft. I think you're going to come back to that problem we talked about of if it sounds like it's written by AI, it is just a turn off to readers. And I think it's a turn off to Google, in all honesty. So I can understand the temptation. I don't think there's anything wrong in using AI if you're really sort of stuck with that fear of the blank page. Maybe you just want to use it to literally have something there you can kind of then edit heavily, chop and change, play around with. If people want to to give that a go. That's fine. But I do think you really have to be careful that you're putting enough of yourself into it. And I'd say particularly at the introduction and the kind of conclusion and call to action, really need to sort of engage and grab the reader. You could probably get away with a bit more AI content sort of in the middle part of the post. And like you say, with things like FAQs, with sort of little short paragraphs and stuff, AI might do the job okay.
Yeah. We come back again to AI will not replace you as a writer. Like it just cannot. It cannot replace you in the context of content that real humans will actually want to read and feel a connection to. So on the few articles that I've generated from a first draft and kind of worked and tweaked into what my final product is using AI, I have spent so much time, let me tell you. Like if writing an article from start to finish that's say 3,000 words long, super in-depth stuff, takes me anywhere from 5 to 8 hours usually, then my AI process will still take me 2 to 3 hours. Like I'll generate maybe the first draft, or I'll use my favorite tool, the YouTube video to blog post generator, and get a first draft of a post. And then I'll still spend so much time with it. I will rewrite the intro and the conclusion completely. That's almost a given. It's very rare that an intro or a conclusion, any of these pieces where you could benefit from having examples, story, lived experiences from me as the creator injected into it, I will pretty much completely rewrite those every single time. And then, as you said, like the meat of the content, it really depends on how well you're prompting AI and what kinds of data sources you're giving it. Like inside WriteBlogger, we have this feature called Knowledge, where you can add your articles, your blog to the actual AI behind the scenes, so that it's pulling from, essentially your brain, your content library, in order to create the pieces of content in your account. So that's the kind of stuff where I do see like, all right, there's potential here. Like I could see these tools becoming more and more useful, especially over time. Every time a new model's released, we do see a big uptake in like the quality of the outputs. But yeah, at the end of the day, great for first draft starter stuff, but it cannot replace you as the writer.
Yeah, I'd 100% agree with you. And I think you're right, those tools are becoming more sophisticated, and it's so cool that you have that feature in WriteBlogger, and that you can get AI to sort of mimic your own voice to some degree if you can train it like that. You can improve prompts. So, sometimes I'll play around with prompting AI, like say, write this at a certain reading grade, or make it like not too formal but not too informal, because AI tends to seem to go like wildly one way or the other for me. But it is quite hard to get it spot on for your own voice. And I think that's where you're right. Like there's always going to be sort of some level of editing time. And I think, you might get your post down from like 8 hours to 2 hours, but you're not going to get it down to like 5 minutes and still have a quality post at the end of it.
Yeah, it'll always be imperfect. I can promise that, because it's trained on human created material in theory, right? And we as humans are also imperfect too. So why would AI ever be perfect?
And I think the other thing people need to keep in mind with AI is that it's not creative in the way a human is. So it can pull from sort of existing data sets, obviously. And as you're saying, the data, the training is becoming better, but it won't come up with a completely fresh example that nobody else has ever used before, because that doesn't exist in the world. And I think that's where, as a human, you bring your own lived experience, you bring your expertise, you bring all your ideas to it. And that's really what readers want, isn't it? I mean, that's why they, if you think about it, there are going to be hundreds of blogs on any given topic. I mean, and the whole point of SEO is we're all trying to rank for the same sort of set of keywords. And the reason people choose to read one blog over another is that human connection and that quality within the writing, which doesn't mean it has to be Shakespeare or Jane Austen or anything like that, but it has to be sort of quality in the sense of it's saying something meaningful. It's not just like nothing but what an AI has kind of put together from every similar blog post out there.
100%. So for freelancers out there, you're a freelance writer yourself. How do you feel about using AI tools as a freelancer? You're being paid to write, to create content for brands, for other people. How do you feel about that? How do you navigate that really interesting thing?
That's a really fascinating area because my thinking has sort of shifted on it a bit over the last year or two. So to begin with, I was quite reluctant to use AI. I didn't feel it would provide the same level of quality. Second, I felt that I would do so much editing, and actually I prefer writing to editing. So I was like, well, why not just write it in the first place myself? I've been freelancing for 16 years, so I'm quite quick. Like, it takes me longer sometimes to draft it with AI and then rewrite the lot. But so as time has gone by, more of my clients have wanted the use of AI. In fact, one of my clients is an AI company, so they've been experimenting much more, obviously, with their own process, kind of using their own tools. And what I do for them now is much more on the editing and optimization side of things. And with what the content they're producing is very business to business. It's very kind of factual and informative, and it's quite SEO driven. So it doesn't need, we want it to be good, but it doesn't need to have that strong sense of personality that you might have in a more kind of business to consumer model. So yeah, so I don't think as a freelancer I would want to use AI without disclosing that to the client. I'd use it if the client wants me to use AI, that's fine. If I want to use AI as part of my writing process, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But at this stage, I would still let the client know. I'd say I'm going to use AI tools to help me with brainstorming. Or I'm going to use AI to help with the drafting, but I will be editing everything line by line. I mean, ultimately, I would want the client to not be able to tell the difference between something that I wrote 100% myself and something that I used AI to assist. Because I feel like if there's a difference, then there's a quality drop. And I wouldn't want that. Just so for me, it's the same. If we come back to the idea of an assistant, if I wanted to take on another writer to work with me, a more junior writer, I would edit everything they produced, and I would want it to 100% meet up to my standards before it ever went to my client. And I think with AI, it's the same thing.
I think this is so interesting too because, my background also as a freelance writer, freelance content marketer, there was a point where I was subcontracting out work to a few of my favorite writer friends as well. And that's not necessarily something that I would disclose to every client. Some of them I'd have that very open kind of relationship with, and that's cool, but it didn't feel like a moral or ethical concern to me to have writing help on my end in order to scale up like my production as long as I continued feeling good about the output. So does that feel like a similar thing here, just a new novel technology sliding in instead of that subcontracting piece?
I think that's interesting you say that, because I was sort of thinking, well, actually, if I was getting another writer involved, would I expect my client to know or care? I'm not sure that I would. I think, like you, I'd feel that probably so long as the output was what they were expecting, the process is less important. I think my feelings with AI, I suppose, are more around that I know some people in the writing world have quite strong views on the use of AI, and some people like it to be disclosed if AI has been used in production, not just of text necessarily, but particularly of images as well. I write fiction too, and in the self-publishing world, people can be very anti-AI for things like book covers. There's a lot of sort of mixed views on it. So I think I would just tread a little bit cautiously, depending on who I was working with, what their views might be. I think people are becoming more open to AI, and I do think there are a lot of tools that writers use, like Grammarly for editing, which use AI, and I don't think people really think of it that way. Lots and lots of writers use Grammarly. I've often been asked by clients specifically to use Grammarly because it's the one they all use, and I don't think anyone's going to question. No one's going to question that AI helped me correct my typos. So I think it's probably we're just in this sort of shift at the moment where people are becoming comfortable with it. Some people less so. Some people have, I think, some understandable reservations about AI and perhaps what data is it drawing on, particularly for artwork, has become, I think, a little bit more contentious. But I mean, I think ultimately freelancers just have to make that decision for themselves. There's so many things as a freelancer where you have to decide what ethical line you will take on something. And I think if somebody uses AI and doesn't want to disclose it to a client, I think that's okay. I think that's up to them. I think it's maybe just be aware that that some people are still quite anti AI? And is it something that, if you think a client might not be comfortable with it, maybe just run it past them first, or just be clear about how you're planning to use AI in producing their content?
I think you hit the nail on the head right there. I think the devil's in the details with this stuff. So if you're delivering content that does feel very heavily AI generated to your client, and the expectation is that it's not AI generated, or maybe you didn't even discuss it, and the implication, the assumption is that you're writing it, then I think you do have to be very careful and probably reconsider what your process is like there. Because for me, speaking as a client, someone who hires people to help me with writing, I want it to feel human. And I don't care at all how someone arrives at that destination. But if you're going to use AI tools in that process along the way, just make sure you're doing these things that we're talking about: editing, intros, conclusions, making sure things flow, making sure that the outline actually makes sense to a fellow human reader. Those are the kinds of things that, I mean, I care about the end result, not the process necessarily to getting there. And I also think that, this is so brand new. In a year, 2 years, I mean, think about what it's going to be like in 5 years, where these tools are going to be ubiquitous. It's going to be assumed that everyone is using AI powered fill in the blank to help with whatever stage of the process of creation looks like. And how do you feel about that?
I mean, to be 100% honest, as a freelancer, it can be a little bit scary. I've definitely seen some of my gigs sort of shift quite a bit, and one or two of my gigs have pretty much gone away because people have turned to AI to do the kind of thing I was doing. And that, it's always worrying as a freelancer when something that you were doing, kind of, that client's no longer around. But of course, that is kind of part of the freelancing life. Like, for all sorts of reasons in the past, some clients close their business, some decide to bring all their writing in-house, so they no longer work with freelancers. There are all kinds of reasons why a gig, won't last forever. I don't think any freelancing gig can ever last forever. So I think I could completely sympathise with freelance writers who feel a little bit concerned about where AI is going. But I think also it offers just so many possibilities. And I think we're probably just seeing the tip of the iceberg, aren't we, on what AI can do, how it can kind of help and assist. And I never want to see it replace writers. I mean, I love writing. I'm a writer. It's what I want to do with my life. But I guess I have no problem with AI doing some of the more boring and tedious bits to kind of free me up for the more creative bits. I think that's sort of the role I see it playing kind of now and, over the next few years.
This may just be the eternal optimist in me, but I actually think that the proliferation of all this generative AI stuff will create like a premium, a demand for real humans who are domain experts and people who really have a skill, a talent that they've nurtured, whatever their craft is. Could be writing, could be video editing, could be, audio editing, anything, design, it doesn't really matter. I think this stuff will actually create a premium for people who want to work with other humans who they know are very skilled and talented at what they do. And, again, in the details, right? Like it doesn't really matter so much to me if someone's using AI tools and processes along the way, as long as what the output is feels right to me and hits my expectations. So I want to give you a hypothetical here. So we have a lot of people who are going to be watching, listening to this, who are relatively new to content creation. And this could be new bloggers, this could be small business owners who want to create content and have really busy schedules, right? So they don't have this 5 to 8 hours I'm talking about to sit down and just write an entire long form article educating their audience about something. How would you advise someone who's relatively new to content creation to get started, if they even should wade their way into the waters of AI?
And I do really sympathise with the kind of time barriers. I think like every writer I talk to, pretty much their biggest problem is always just having the time to write. And I don't think, just to reassure people, I don't think you need like 8 hours on every blog post. I mean, I think it's amazing if you can spend 8 hours and create the sort of resources that you're publishing, Ryan. But not every blog post has to be a kind of really big definitive piece of content. So I think absolutely, like, give it a go. You know, if you want to get into writing content or creating any kind of content, do it, and use AI to help you speed up the process where you can. Personally, I like to kind of batch together different tasks in the writing process. So I'd like to come up with a whole bunch of ideas at once, and then come up with like a bunch of outlines at once. So I might outline like 4 or 8 posts as a little batch. And then when I come to draft them, I've already kind of got the outline. I've probably already started a bit of thinking, and it just helps me get through it quicker. And personally, I like to draft my own blog posts for my own blog myself, but you could use AI for bits of the process. And I think if you've got an outline, it does really help, because then you can go, okay, I'm going to draft this little section with AI, or I'm going to add this little bit in. So to use it as a sort of time saver like that. And I think maybe just experiment with a few different tools. Like, I know there's always a sort of time cost to trying things out, because sometimes I've tried things with AI and then I felt like, oh, that wasn't the kind of wasn't the output I wanted from it. That wasn't what I expected. But sometimes you get something, you think, oh, whoa, it really nailed that. Or, oh, actually, that was a really helpful idea that I wouldn't have had without AI. So I think to spend at least a little bit of time, just kind of play with it, have fun with it. Don't be afraid of it. But equally, don't just blindly rely on the AI. Always make sure you've got the time. And I do think bloggers need to build in editing time, just to kind of really nail that piece of content. So even if you're short on time, just make sure you have got a little bit of time set aside so you can just edit it, make sure everything reads smoothly, really make sure you've got a good conclusion and call to action, because that's like one of the biggest mistakes I see is people just they just kind of stop at the end of their post. They're probably so relieved to have finished it. They're just like, right, done, publish. And sometimes just even 5 more minutes just to kind of wrap it up well, just to have some call to action for the reader can make a really big difference to how that post is going to perform.
Totally. And you touched on something here that I love a lot too, is it can feel like a huge relief to hit publish. And I don't know about you, but whenever I hit publish, that's when my real editing actually begins. I read through the post and I'm like, oh crap, that. And then you've got everything else that begins too. Promotion, how you get the word out about your content. So there's a lot here, but I think, this is a great place to wrap up. Ali, thank you for joining us. Can you tell everyone where to learn more about you and what you're up to?
Oh, absolutely. So I blog at aliventures.com, which is ALIVENTURES.com. And I write about making the most of your writing time. And I kind of look at writing from the angle of a freelancer, as a fiction writer, as a blogger to some degree. And then you can also find me kind of guest blogging all around the web. If you Google Ali Luke, you'll find far more of me than you probably want. Yeah, but I love to write for different sites because it kind of stretches me a bit as a writer. It gets my name out there. And it's something that I think actually more bloggers could still be doing, is just more guest blogging. It's been a kind of popular technique for years and years, and I think it's still a really valuable way to grow your own audience.
I'll second that. Ali, thank you again for joining us.
Oh, thanks, Ryan. It's been great to be here.